In Lord of the Flies, Ralph and Jack start as peers, British schoolboys, age 12, marooned without adults after their plane is shot down. They argue about shelters and signal fires the way kids argue about anything, competitively, pointlessly, with the particular stubbornness of boys who both need to be right. William Golding is careful, for a long time, to keep everything recognizable. The cruelty doesn't arrive like a storm. It seeps in through the cracks so small, each one seems like nothing. The painted faces are practical, for hunting, for camouflage. The chanting is just rhythm, just something to do with your body when you're frightened and try not to show it. The first time they pin Robert down in the grass and the spear gets a little close, it's rough play. Everyone laughs, and it's over before it started. Except it wasn't nothing. The group absorbed it. No individual boy authored that moment. It belonged to the circle, to the heat of the game, to all of them, and therefore none of them. And that shared absence of authorship is exactly what makes the next time easier, and the time after that easier still. Each incident a little further than the last, each one absorbed by the same mechanism, until the mechanism has carried them somewhere none of them could have walked to alone. By the time they're on the beach and Simon is dead, the boys who killed him genuinely cannot fully account for what occurred. Some of them were in a trance. Some of them thought it was the beast. Some of them knew and have already begun forgetting. Golding gives you that ambiguity with surgical precision, because the horror of that scene, what makes it sit in the chest long after you close the book, isn't that these boys became savage. It's that they remained in almost every measurable way the same boys. The situation did the work. They just stopped interrupting it. But de-individuation needs a trigger, and one of the most powerful triggers in human history isn't violence or ideology. It's a village square on a summer morning. Shirley Jackson published The Lottery in June of 1948, and The New Yorker received more letters in response than for any piece of fiction it had ever printed. Most of them were furious. Readers demanded to know which town still conducted the lottery so they could cancel subscriptions if it was their state. What Jackson had actually done was construct the most precise literary demonstration of a principle Robert Cialdini would later spend decades formalizing: social proof. The mechanism by which the human brain concludes that something is correct, permissible, even necessary, because everyone around you is treating it that way. In the village, nobody knows why the lottery exists. Old Man Warner, the oldest man in town, can only tell you they've always done it, and that stopping would be foolishness, catastrophe, the collapse of something essential he can't name. The black box they draw from is rotting. Half the original ceremony has been abandoned already. The songs, the salute, the formal recitation. What remains is the ending, and that's enough. The morning is sunny, the flowers are blooming, people are catching up with each other before it starts, laughing, talking about planting and rain. Tessie Hutchinson arrives late, jokes that she couldn't leave the dishes, and takes her place beside her husband with the ease of someone who's done this every year of her life. She participates fully, right up until the slip of paper with the black mark comes out of her hand. Then she says it isn't fair. And her neighbors, people she's known her whole life, people she was laughing with 20 minutes ago, pick up rocks. Her children pick up rocks. Her husband picks up a rock. Jackson doesn't linger. The story ends in one paragraph, almost clinical in its brevity, because the point isn't the violence. The point is the absolute ordinariness of every single person holding a stone. Nobody hates Tessie. Nobody wants her dead. But the ritual requires a body, and this year the body is hers, and everyone present knows what you do when the lottery ends. Inherited tradition is one of the most efficient delivery systems for atrocity ever built. It requires no hatred, no ideology, no moment of moral conversion. It only requires that the ritual be old enough that questioning it feels like the aberration, not the act itself. And then there's what happens when the institution doing this is the state, and the ritual is daily. and it has been daily for your entire life. People remember Room 101, the rats, the final breaking of Winston Smith. But George Orwell is very careful to show you that what happens in Room 101 is almost beside the point, because Winston has been bending for years before he ever gets there, in ways he can't fully perceive from the inside. The 2 minutes hate comes early in the novel. Winston attends it already narrating his own detachment, already positioning himself as an observer rather than a participant, already certain he is watching the spectacle rather than inside it. And then he finds himself screaming, flooded by a collective fury he neither invited nor chose, swept along by the energy of every body in the room until his own body is doing something his mind didn't authorize. He notices this. He's disturbed by it. And then the hate ends, and he walks back to his desk, and tomorrow he'll attend again. Stanley Milgram spent years, beginning in 1963 at Yale, trying to understand the mechanics of exactly this. He placed volunteers in a room with a stranger, a shock machine with switches labeled up to 450 volts, and an authority figure in a lab coat who responded to every hesitation with the same calm instruction: please continue. 65% of ordinary people, teachers, engineers, clerks, people who loved their families and had never harmed anyone, administered what they believed were severe and dangerous electric shocks to a screaming stranger. Not because they wanted to cause pain, because the structure of the situation made stopping feel like the transgression. Every step they had taken made the next step feel like its natural continuation. The protocol was right there. The authority said continue. The momentum of compliance had a weight of its own. Winston's tragedy isn't the rats. Is that by the time he sits in the Chestnut Tree Cafe with tears running down his face and something that functions like love for Big Brother moving through him, the 2 minutes hate and the telescreens and the children's leagues and 20 years of living inside the architecture of Oceania have done to his perception exactly what Milgram's protocol did to his volunteers. They made the structure feel more real than his own judgment. Asch called this informational conformity. Not performing agreement with the group, but actually coming to see what the group sees. Winston doesn't perform loyalty at the end. He's simply lost reliable access to the version of himself that could tell the difference. What ties these three worlds together isn't cruelty, and it isn't weakness, it's architecture. The specific design of a situation that redistributes moral weight away from the individual, into the group, into the tradition, into the institution, until a person's own ethical commitments become less like a foundation and more like furniture. Present when things are calm, rearranged when the room fills up. Zimbardo, Asch, and Milgram all arrived at the same place by different roads. The situation is doing most of the work, most of the time, for most people. We resist this. We resist it because accepting it means conceding that our values are more porous than we've built around our self-image. That we are, to a degree that is genuinely uncomfortable to measure, products of whatever room we happen to be standing in. Most of us have never been on that island, never stood in that square with a stone, never lived inside a state that made hatred a daily ritual. But most of us have stayed quiet when we knew something was wrong, because the room was quiet. Most of us have laughed when we shouldn't have, because the people around us were laughing. Most of us have felt it, not violent, not dramatic, just the slow, steady pull of this is what people do here, and you're one of the people. Golding, Jackson, and Orwell weren't warning us about monsters. They were describing the conditions under which people who are not monsters become capable of almost anything.
Hey, if you thought this video was cool, subscribe and share with a friend so you don't miss the next one. And if you love high-octane action stories, check out my latest novel through the link in the description or in the pinned comments.